So next we wanted to look at the biology of this. So have you ever been hangry? That's this combination of hunger and anger. Maybe you're hangry right now. I know it's at the end of a long day of work. Well, we wanted to see if this is a real thing. And so what we did was we measured participants' blood sugar levels. So we had about 100 married couples come into the lab, and we gave each person one of these AccuCheck things. So they measured their blood glucose levels at the end of the day. And then what they also did is we gave them these voodoo dolls and a bunch of pins, and we told them this doll represents your spouse. And what we want you to do, you've been answering some questions about your spouse, and we wanted you to let any negative energy out, and this is how you can do that. And what we predicted is that this energy that's circulating in people's blood, their glucose levels, that it would look a lot like what we found in the previous study. That when people's blood sugar was low, that they would stab the doll with more pins. And that's precisely what we found. Now, I have to tell you that what happened next was kind of a surprise to me. So this paper got accepted, it got published, and then one morning, my wife and I, we were having breakfast and watching TV, and the Today Show was on, and they were talking about our study. They were talking about hunger, about being hangry, but the reason why I bring this up is if you look carefully at this picture, you'll see a bunch of voodoo dolls in the middle of the table. And so after describing our study, they passed the voodoo dolls around, and they took turns stabbing them with pins. So this is kind of a big day for us. So this is kind of a funny application of our results being communicated to the general public. Finally, our social lives. You know, we have to ask ourselves, why do we control our impulses? And because it takes a lot of work to do that. It's hard to do that. Well, I think one big reason why we do it is because we get relationships. And I think that we have a need to belong, a need of, it's one of our basic motivations. We talk about this throughout the book. And in the chapter that we devote to motivation, we have a specific section that covers this on the need to belong. And people fulfill their need to belong in lots of different ways. People have friendships, they have romantic relationships. This is, we have families. This is me, my wife, my daughter, Bevy. And this is more recently my daughter, Bevy, and this is my son, Ellis, the day after he was born, this April. And he's nearly 6 months old now. And we adopted both of our children from birth. And this is one way that I've fulfilled my need to belong. But sometimes things don't work out as we plan. Sometimes we experience rejection in lots of different ways. And on average, people feel left out on a fairly regular basis. College students feel left out quite a bit. Even outside of college, people were feeling lonely and ostracized and excluded. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to see if this would impact people's willingness to control their impulses. So what we did was we set up a situation where people were led to believe that other people didn't pick them for something. So participants came into the laboratory, they met a bunch of strangers who were of the same gender. After about 15 minutes of getting to know them, we put them into individual rooms, and we said, write down the names of the 2 people you want to work with most on an upcoming group task. Came back, and by random assignment, we told half of them, well, what happened this time is nobody picked you. And so because nobody picked you, I can't get these groups together like I normally would. And so you're going to spend the rest of the time alone by yourself. So those are our rejected people. And again, we debrief people at the end of the study. We tell them why we had to deceive them. And people leave the laboratory really happy. The other half of the participants were told the opposite. They're told, what happened this time is everybody picked you. So that's great, but because everybody picked you, I can't get these groups together like I normally do. So you'll need to spend the rest of the hour alone by yourself. So the idea is we wanted to get everybody in this room by themselves, but just for different reasons. And this is when the experimenter returned to the room, and gave participants the opportunity to indulge themselves. And so the experimenter had a bowl of small chocolate chip cookies and said, since you're in this room by yourself, we'd like for you to do a pre-testing activity for another study we're doing. And so just eat as many or as few of these cookies as you want to. Fill out the short questionnaire about them and open the door to let us know when you're finished. So what happened is when people were told everybody picked you, they ate about 4 cookies. So 4 cookies to understand what cookie tastes like. So we have mild pigging out going on here, but or indulging yourself a little bit. But people were told everybody picked you. They ate a lot more. They ate over twice as many cookies. And we also asked them, did the cookies taste better? And they said, no, I just couldn't stop eating them. So here are some practical tips that are scientifically based that I, give my students that can help them have better self-control. And one is building strength. So self-control really does function like a muscle or an all-purpose energy resource. I talk about it with my students in the same way as your cell phone runs a lot of different apps, a lot of different applications. It uses the same energy resource to do that, the same battery to do that. Your body and your mind are the same. And so if you are strengthening your self-control in one domain, it can pay off in other sorts of domains. And so if one thing that we have people do is we have people use their non-dominant hand for everyday activities, just between 8 and 5 p.m. for a couple of weeks. And it seems like that wouldn't do anything to people, but what it gets people in the habit of is getting out of their comfort zone, and that's the most important thing. And what we find is that asking them to do even a weird activity like using your non-dominant hand for everyday activities, just like carrying your books in your backpack and cooking and things like that, brushing your teeth, what we find is that they're less aggressive a couple of weeks later. Second thing, playing offense against your environment. We are bombarded with opportunities to break our diets, to not go to the gym, to watch too many episodes of Netflix, or to spend a lot of time on our phones. And so, one thing that my students talk to me a lot about is how much they struggle with their phones. They say, I'm always on my phone. I don't want to always be checking it. There's a recent report that that came out last week that suggests that people touch their phones up to 2,000 times a day. That's a lot. So one reason for that is we're playing defense against their phones instead of offense. So simply turn your phone over. It's going to be out of sight, out of mind, and it's going to be a lot more helpful. Third thing, take your mind out of the middle. When you're battling yourself about when you should control your impulses, it becomes a lot more difficult to do that. It's a lot easier to set up a contract with yourself before you're in the tempting situation. So if this happens, then I'll do this. If I get home from class, I'll exercise for 30 minutes. When I eat dinner, I'll eat fruits and vegetables. That way, it's already decided, and it was decided by you. And so this way, when you get home from class, you don't have to decide whether you're going to exercise or eat fruits and vegetables. This is just something you've already set up with yourself. And it seems simple, but these things are incredibly effective. The fourth thing to consider is how those standards, those things that we know that tell us, you are guided toward, an appropriate way of thinking, feeling, and acting, those things shift over time. So think of the speed limit. Our speed limit has shifted over time on the interstate from 65 to 75 to 80 miles an hour. In, where I was born in South Dakota, some places are 80 miles an hour now. Beauty, in some respects, had the standard for beauty has shifted. Here we have a picture of Marilyn Monroe, and here we have an image of another professional model who is very, very thin. And in fact, this model, this specific advertisement was deemed potentially harmful to viewers because it modeled a unhealthy body type, and it was pulled last year. I think this is just an example of how standards can shift. And we all experience this. You know, our standards for what's appropriate and what's inappropriate shift as well. So those two guys that's the same person. That's me. And I've tried to practice self-control in my own life. As has been mentioned, I run. I read a book about running by a guy from California named Dean Karnassus. He's an ultramarathon runner. I didn't know that existed until I had read this book. And then I set a goal for myself that I wanted to run the two most difficult ultramarathons in the world in the same year. And that was this year. The first one is in the Sahara Desert. So I flew over to Africa, and I ran in a race called the Marathon des Sables, the Marathon of the Sands. And it's a 147-mile foot race across the Sahara Desert. It's a stage race, so you run different stages of it every day. It would get up to 130 degrees during the day, as it was when this picture was taken, and then it would get down to about 40 degrees at night. It was very, very difficult, but it was very rewarding. A few months after that, in July, the hottest time of the year, I went to the hottest place on earth, Death Valley, and I ran in the Badwater Ultramarathon. And this is me at the finish line. And this is 135 miles nonstop running across Death Valley. I'm very tired in this picture. It took me a little over 41 hours to finish it, but I still did it. And this is me, as a very sort of an average Joe, professor who simply just got an idea that this is something that I wanted to do, even if it would take me 5 years of constant training to do it, I would do it. And so I think what I tell my students, and I shared this with them openly, and it helps them, I think, because what it shows them is, number one, is that it's great to have things that you're doing outside of your professional life. It's wonderful. I work very, very hard, and it's also great to have hobbies outside of your profession. But the more important point and the more relevant point to our discussion today is that all of us have something deep within us that can enable us to accomplish goals that seem impossible, that seem like only certain people can accomplish them. But I think this is one of the gifts of psychology as a science, is the data are very clear that self-control is one of our greatest human strengths, and it's one of the easiest to improve. So that's all that I got, and now we can take some of your questions.